Welcome to Crescendo Conversations. In each episode, I invite a global leader to share 4 pieces of music that shaped their life, their identity, and their career, and how they have navigated pressure, change, and purpose along the way. Today is the final episode of our first season, and I couldn't have chosen a better conversation to close it with. Some people lead from the front. My guest today leads from the middle, attentive to timing, to people, to what the moment actually asks for. Audiences listen differently when she's there, so do the musicians on stage. Long before the podium and the titles, we were students together, sharing stages, playing chamber music, learning to listen under pressure. That shared language grew into a friendship I value deeply. Away from the podium, she's the happiest around a table with good food and wine, or by the water where she recalibrates. What I admire most isn't what she leads, but how steadily she shows up with judgment, restraint, and care. She's also one of Australia's leading conductors working across symphony, opera, ballet, and film. She's the principal conductor of Western Australian Ballet and has stood in front of orchestras from Australia to Singapore to United States. A Churchill Fellow, a Fellow of the Dallas Opera's Hart Institute for Women Conductors, and an inductee of the Western Australian Women's Hall of Fame. She's as recognised for her influence as for her artistry. It's a real pleasure to welcome my friend Jessica Gethin. Hi Jessica, welcome. It's so great to have you on the program.
Oh, it's really lovely to have the chance to talk.
Jess, for our interview, for our chat today, I invited you to choose a piece of music that reminds you of your upbringing, your childhood, your origin. Would you like to talk about the music?
Yes, it's interesting. I chose the first movement of Bruch's Violin Concerto. It's a tricky question for me because my parents being both musicians and my whole household grew up very musical, so we were sort of harmonising to Happy Birthday before we could walk. So my childhood memories of music span everything from listening to Gregorian chant all the way to the Yellow Jackets jazz and the symphonic repertoire in between. But when I was very, very young, I remember spending a lot of time at my grandfather's house, and he had some wonderful LP 78 records. And he had one particular one of the Bruch Violin Concerto, and because the concerto starts just on an open G string, which beginners can play, I used to sort of mimic the beginning of this concerto quite often, and I sort of vowed to try and learn it for him as a very young child. It was well beyond my technical needs, what I could do, my capabilities. But I sort of set that as a bit of a task and used to always play the opening few bars for him as a kid. And that's the last thing that he said to me on as he was, the day that he'd passed away, as he was in his last hours. He said, you keep on playing that piece. And he sang just one note, and I knew that was a Bruch Violin Concerto. So that's something that's always had a particular memory for me.
Wow, how beautiful. And that's such a visceral recollection of your precious time as a child, and also with granddad. How old were you when you heard that piece?
I probably would have been about 5 when I first remember it. I feel like when you have very clear memories, I can't really pick the age, but I can imagine the room and the time and the place and the feeling. I almost sort of go back to being in that room, hearing it. It was probably before I was playing the violin myself, but I was always very attracted and drawn to the string sound, so it was quite a natural thing for me.
And what a beautiful piece to fall in love with music through.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. I mean, it's core violin repertoire, and I've conducted it many times before, since, and and played it. But it's for me then that was sort of like the pinnacle of of what the instrument could do and what music could do. And just it starts with this G minor arpeggio, and just the opening sort of bars of that and the way that it could be played a little bit differently or felt was kind of opened up a whole world of possibility for me musically.
Wow, it sounds like the perfect moment for us to listen to a little bit of that. Let's do that. Sorry to stop it so abruptly. What a beautiful piece. Tell us about Jessica when she was a young girl, and you just said you came from a family of musicians. Tell us on a typical Sunday what's happening in Jessica's household.
Well, I had two older sisters who both played instruments younger, but didn't sort of take it further past school. And a younger sister who I then worked with for many years, Sophie, who's a wonderful cellist. And my dad, who's a well-known jazz guitarist. He's made his own albums and was a lecturer at WAAPA, the WA Academy of Performing Arts, where I now lecture, for well over 30 years. And he played with WAZO, the Symphony Orchestra, as their guitarist casual for 45 years. And my mum, a beautiful singer, so they actually met doing a gig together, mum and dad. And so a typical Sunday would either have been maybe going to one of Dad's shows, or maybe I had a WA Youth Orchestra concert, or we were sort of fighting over who's doing their practice in the practice room, music room, at what time. But I also remember, my mum would always put on music while she was cooking dinner, or it was certainly a big part of my life. Mum and Dad late at night, falling asleep to the sounds of Dad playing and Mum singing, around the dinner table. That was kind of a very normal thing for us growing up.
Well, it sounds absolutely beautiful, and I'm feeling slightly emotional, Jess, because first of all, it's a beautiful depiction of young Jess and your childhood, and how you started, how it all started for you, but also knowing your family. I can picture everybody, and I know what a beautiful, eloquent, musical, talented, humble family you have. And also now, me being a mother, I can just imagine the impact of music on children, that as parents we have our choice of music, how we listen, where we listen, and what we hear. It's such a beautiful picture to paint. So you started with the violin, and all your sisters, they were music students as well. What else was of interest to young Jessica?
Well, I did a couple of different things. I dabbled in a bit of netball, for a couple of years, until I realised that the games are the same time as the youth orchestra and that you can damage fingers and things like that. So I had to choose. Even as even younger, I did calisthenics for a little time. I wouldn't say I was sporty, but I did try other things. I was always very interested in art. I did TE, like Year 12 art as a final subject. So in the medium of paint. So I was sort of I guess another form of expression was a very natural thing for me, and I sort of occasionally turn back to that when I have time. Not very often these days, but I certainly used to a bit. And I think maybe like a lot of 10, 11, 12-year-olds, my dream was just to own a horse and go horse riding and those sort of things. But really from the age of about 12, I decided that I was going to be a musician. I thought a violinist at the time, not a conductor, because I'd never seen any women conductors. But as a violinist, I remember finding out one day that there was such a concept that you could have your full-time career and job was to go to work every day and play a different symphony rather than sitting at a desk and a computer was just like mind-boggling for me. So it's funny how it comes back around, because I then spent many years just in the world of music, but then shifting into music leadership, you find I'm back in front of a computer every day as well.
That's very cute. You said from a very early age, you knew that you wanted to pursue music. Did you know what that meant to you as a young person, apart from you'll be working away from desks?
I just knew that I wanted to play in an orchestra. I'd been to see the West Australian Symphony Orchestra, especially when my dad was playing in it. And I used to stare at the concertmaster chair and think, that looks really great. I mean, being able to do that every day, and what an extreme gift that was, and an opportunity to play music and explore all the different composers. And I'd grown up with such an eclectic influence of different styles of music as well. So I mean, even as my uni days, I was doing classical violin, but I was also doing jazz trio stuff with my dad. I was in like a tango group, and I toured America as a rock violinist. Like, I did a bit of everything. So I sort of had always dabbled in not just one genre, but just in the universal world of music.
And how was that received by your parents when you shared your love for music, and also that turning point that you decided you were going to pursue music?
Yeah, I think they were always very supportive, but being musicians and Dad being a full-time musician, they also understood what that meant. So they were always sort of saying, for starters, you don't have to be a musician just because we are. There are other things out there in life. And my elder two sisters, one's a high school principal and one's in finance and payroll. So we've all been quite different paths. But yeah, I think for them, they were always extremely supportive. If that's what I want to do, and they knew that I was very assured in that, then they would support me.
Beautiful. And you just mentioned when you were a young girl, you had never seen any female conductors. So from when that became a reality? Well,
I mean, I guess maybe my later teenage years, I may have come across Simone Young and seen her doing a concert. But I don't really remember thinking that it was more a possibility of what I could do as my job, if that makes sense. It hadn't really occurred to me that that's something that I could do, or that would be open to me. I guess I also probably didn't really understand what conductors did other than stand up the front and wave around, like a lot of people don't. So that it was really an accidental falling into conducting of opportunity, where because I was very serious about my violin playing, so I was often at a position where I was playing as a concertmaster. I was concertmaster of the University Symphony Orchestra. So I started looking at the scores to see how the whole orchestra picture fit. At the same time, I was also supporting myself by working as a music teacher, and was asked to take on some school ensembles. So I was conducting at a school orchestra level, and then someone asked me to fill in a community orchestra. So I stepped into and conducted my first community symphony, and it kind of just started snowballing until I realised I was actually sort of being asked to step in and conduct or play lead as a concertmaster of the orchestra, where you're sort of directing from the orchestral chair. And it was sort of a very natural. I never said I'm going to be a conductor now. I don't think there's ever been a moment. It's just been one day. I remember auditioning for the Symphony Australia Conductor Development Program, maybe about 19, perhaps 20, something like that, where I spent a few years there. And I remember sort of just, there was a bit of a turning point where I thought, because I was often the only woman on the course, and it's hard. It's really hard. And you're standing up in front of the State Symphony Orchestra conducting, a Stravinsky or a Beethoven or something like that you've never done before. And you're just going, how do I even approach these time signatures that I've never seen, with musicians that you have such respect for, who've played this music for decades under the best, greatest international conductors. And what have I possibly got to offer? up there. So it's a real test of developing who you are as a musician and what you have to offer, and finding some confidence in that, which takes a long time. So there was a point where I thought, I'm not sure if I'm cut out for this, because it certainly takes a very tough skin to get through some of those early experiences. But then just one day I realised I was sort of 50-50 playing violin and conducting, and then 75-25, and then gradually the scales sort of tipped until I got my first manager, agent, and started getting positions in conducting, and now I think it's safe to say I'm definitely a conductor.
I think you just shared a very courageous story of success. How for a young person, you just always stayed curious and worked open-mindedly. And I often believe that opportunities are not presented, they are grabbed. And sounds like you were always ready and prepared to go for the hard yards and do the hard work and grab the next opportunity.
Yeah, I think there's a lot in that, actually. I certainly never had someone say, hey, you should be a conductor, why don't you try this or do this? I just sort of took every next step or next door. It's funny, I often, when I'm talking to students or mentoring, I tell people that when you read a biography and you see all these many, won this award and has this role and got this award and this fellowship, what you don't see is that the other 500 pages of invisible ink of awards I haven't won and fellowships I didn't get and auditions I didn't pass that have made that other biography list or CV come to light. You don't ever show people that one, but often the people who have the biggest biographies also have the biggest invisible ink. And so I think that ability to have resilience and the reality when it sets in, when you realise I may not be the best musician here on the day, but I have put in the work, I am prepared for it, and I do have something worthy to say, even if not everyone agrees with it. And that is okay. That doesn't mean, someone else might have a different way that they want that phrase to go. Someone else might not particularly like my manner of technique. You're never going to find a symphony orchestra who all unanimously love the same conductor. That rarely happens. So you just have to have faith, always bring it back to the music, and have some faith to back yourself, because at the end of the day, that's the only person that's going to do it when you're up there under, huge amount of scrutiny and pressure.
Well, you've just given us so many golden nuggets for not only leadership but also life, Jess. That leads to the one question I have for you. How do you lead people who may not have necessarily chosen you as a leader? And that happens in every organisation, every leadership.
Yeah, it sure does. And it happens, I guess wearing different hats as a conductor, more in the performance space, but then also as a leader in an executive place in arts organisations. And so this can exist for both. And it comes down to the same thing. I think if you lead with strength, grace, integrity, empathy to a point as well. I always think empathetic leadership is important, but you also need to make strong decisions. So and back those, and it's you're always going to get into the situation, as I said, where not everybody agrees with you. But if you've made that decision out of what you believe is the right decision at that time for the right reasons and the right people, it doesn't have agenda behind it. It's not necessarily just strategy driven, but you're doing it with transparency and integrity, and you've done the research. You pulled in enough to be able to make that decision. You just have to trust yourself and go with it. It's a big part of leadership. You won't always be liked by people, and once you acknowledge that, I think it's much easier.
To surrender to that nature of leadership is such an essence of leading, isn't it? And also I really liked what you said about backing yourself. And it's not only just while you're in leadership now, but also sounds like even when you were pursuing music and forging a path for yourself from violin to conducting, you always backed yourself, even when the path was unclear.
Yeah, I think I wonder if there's something in there about where you see yourself as an artist and who you are and where they meet. Sometimes I always like to think people can not like the decision I make, but hopefully that's not that they don't like me, and I'm different to my work to an extent. My work is made up of everything that I put into it. But people who often would think they don't actually know me as a person, very few do. My family and my very close friends know me as a person, and they're the trusted people around me that I surround myself every day. The top 10 people I'd ring in my phone book. The rest of the people just are really good acquaintances that I would know through my work, and sort of understanding the difference perhaps allows you a little bit of control over where that lies and understanding where that sits, if that makes sense.
So being very clear about your boundaries and what you're willing to accept.
Yes, and I think two things. One, that particularly in my industry, I'm not sure, I don't work as much in the corporate world, so it's hard to say, but particularly in my industry, where as an artist can be very caught up in your persona and who you are, that boundary can be very blurred. You know, every single time I walk onto a stage, I'm applauded before I've even done anything. 2,000 people. I haven't even done anything yet. And I walk into rooms with rapturous applause. I don't think anything of it. It doesn't. Someone said, "Oh, it must feel great." It's not about ego. To me, that's just simply ritual. It's a ritual for acknowledging the orchestra for where the concert starts. It doesn't mean anything. I don't feel better whether people clap or not. It's just a normal part of the routine. But I wonder if as well, having children, I have 2 children, and perhaps in a way, having a family brings a great, I think when you use the word boundary, you know, my kids, they're proud of me, but they don't care whether I win that award or not. They just care that I'm their mum. So that kind of also encourages a very safe, protective space for who I am as me and as a mum and woman and family and as Jessica, and who I am as an artist. My entire measurement of myself isn't based on who I am in my professional world, which probably allows me to take more risks because the consequences maybe aren't as dire. Whereas who I am, I measure that by what sort of wife and mother and sister and daughter and friend that I am. That is more important. And maybe that allows me to make decisions in my work that are right. I'm not sure. It just is a different way, a different lens to put on it, I think.
So would you say in your personal world and your professional world, there are 2 sets of values that guide you? Or if there are there any values that they share in common?
No, I think that I'm guided by the same values with anything I make. But I think that I'm having a family and kids that can bring you down to earth so you don't measure yourself on the success of the career. I've never been about people often in interviews and podcasts, I say, what's your your big goal in life, and which concert hall do you want to conduct in, which orchestra? And I think for me, I don't really have that list. I actually, to be honest, I never really have. To me, it's in the process and in the journey and in the physical, in the act of making music that is satisfying. It's not, I could do my best concert with 10 people in the room and then do a concert to 10,000 and it wouldn't make a difference. So it's about the music and not the other things that can be attached to that in a success sort of way. But the same values guide how I live my life and principles of trying to be a good person, I would say guide me in both my professional work and in my personal life. I just don't measure myself by what I do in my professional life. So perhaps that allows you to take more risks because you're not scared of failure quite as much.
Yeah, and truly put things into perspectives, having different pillars in life. That was very, very powerful what you just shared, Jess. And you were saying that you seek, for you, success and enjoyment lie in the process, in the journey, and which is quite unusual because you and I share a very similar background, trained in classical music. And in our training, it's all about aiming to do the very best you can and to get the next award and to be the leading voice on your instrument in your industry. So from what age or what turning point did you receive that kind of wisdom within yourself?
I don't think it was an age or a turning point. I think it was especially modelled by my father as a professional musician. It was never about what mark I got for my AMEB exam or whether I'd won concertmaster. They were always proud and always supportive, but was never a competitive sort of aspect to it. It was more, are you enjoying this piece and what do you like about this work, and being curious and inquisitive about music. That was inspiring to me rather than a lot of the more where a lot of my colleagues had, as you were saying, it was about achievements and passing success, because in some ways, especially perhaps for non-musician parents, in some ways that's the only way that they can measure what we do when you're a student. You know, if you're doing maths, you want to get an A, so surely in music you want to win that award and get that, you know, that's kind of like where it sits. But for me, you know, my dad could have been touring the world. He's had offers, he's done an album in LA and this and that, but he chose to have a quiet life in Perth, being the best musician he can. He now gigs every weekend. He's in his early 80s and he still practices every single, you know, night on guitar to get things right. So his true integrity for what he does and why he does it has always been his driver. It always comes back to the music. And that is the same for me as well. I never set out to do what I'm doing. It's just been almost a byproduct of taking that next step and the journey. I think I said to my husband about a year ago when I had some things that 10 years ago, the fact that I'm doing, you know, Australian ballet season every year, and I was like, oh, is it just at the Opera House? Yeah, we'll just pop over there and do a gig at the Opera House without even thinking about it, or I'm going to New York for this and doing this. That's just like normal language. And 10 years ago, that would have been like, oh, that was so out of reach for me. And it hasn't been a turning point. It's just naturally kind of pushed the scope a bit bigger. But I don't feel any different about my work. I don't act any different with my work. I live it the same way that I was when I was 18 and playing for a string quartet wedding for, you know, $70.
We all remember those years, Jess, and you and I actually played in quite a few ensembles together. In fact, I was going through my clutter. I declutter every year, and I found this piece of paper. I don't know whether you can see on the program. It's a young artist program when both you and I joined 8 other very capable musicians and played with Western Australian Symphony Orchestra as young soloists. And that was recorded by ABC Classic.
Yes, I do remember. Yeah.
Yeah, and you appeared as a violinist.
I did, yes. And see, they're the sort of moments that I think... so my history, when you look at WA Symphony Orchestra, when I was about 5, I remember going to my first concert and watching my dad play in there, and then, you know, had quite a long history with them. I actually did my work experience with WAAPA in year 10 and marked up all the bowings in the library. And then, you know, later on in uni days, when we did this concerto performance together, I think I played Chanson Poème with the orchestra out the front. And then, you know, within a couple of years, I was sort of playing casual in the orchestra. And now I work several seasons a year as a conductor with WAAPA. And even when the pandemic, West Australia sort of first started going back to a new normality, in 2020, I brought them back to the stage and conducted Carmina Burana with them. So it really, if you have a look, so I say it's kind of this organic journey, but if you'd asked me when you and I were playing that week, one day you're going to be conducting one of the biggest works on their return after a closed pandemic, we would have laughed. Because that was so out of... that just, I guess, I was going to say it wasn't on the path, but I also hadn't really given myself a path, so maybe that's why it felt like it was natural.
But this is why your story is so powerful, Jess, and sitting here listening to your story and your version, obviously because I know you over the years, but I think right now what I can hear is the power of your story, how all the titles, achievements, they were just a byproduct of your internal success, your internal enjoyment.
Yeah, I think it's still. I should add that I think it's still important to acknowledge them and celebrate them for one really important reason as well, is that it gives visibility, and it gives visibility for a not very well understood art form, and one that there have been fewer women take the path over those years. So when I was in 2014, around then, 2014, 2015, I was one of the inaugural fellows in the Dallas Opera's Institute for Women Conductors, and they auditioned a couple of hundred women from 27 countries, and 6 were accepted. So it was American, Russian, German, English, Australian, and I think another American. And I remember that was kind of a turning point, because not only did it expose me to 40 operas in the first 3 weeks, and take me out of Australia to work with Dallas for about 4 or 5 years. I think I was going across there, but it actually gave a bit of a push that Australia starts to notice, and that the reason why that fellowship was started is because in 2014 the percentage of women on podiums conducting opera for the US was 4.5%.
Wow.
And that's not good enough. And now, through all of these support programs, it sits, it's somewhere around last year, around 11%. Someone in a newspaper article said that there was now a tsunami of women conductors. I probably would say it's a tiny little ripple, not a tsunami. But until we get to 50-50, we need to sort of keep going there. But so this sort of visibility issue that these awards and fellowships and success steps give you is important from a profile point of view. It's important for opening the doors for others, breaking that ceiling, and those. So they're still important to have. It's just they're not the driver.
Yes, that gives us a beautiful segue to the second song you chose. A piece to talk about transition, courage, and managing the situation. What a piece to talk about transition, courage, and managing the situation.
Yeah, I have. It's always PTSD, I think, listening to it. This is one of the works, Stravinsky's Symphony wind instruments. For starters, I'm a string player, so the whole being with wind instruments was probably my least familiar section of the orchestra. And Stravinsky, as someone who'd done some conducting at a school and community level, I had clear conducting chops, but I hadn't really studied conducting beyond what you do at an undergrad university level. And my first ever big sort of audition for Symphony Australia was this Stravinsky excerpt. And my first course, we had it on the course to conduct with Adelaide Symphony Orchestra many years ago, who incidentally I'm conducting next week. And I remember opening this score, and I didn't even know, this is where I thought, I'm no longer a violinist. Because I could view a Mozart symphony from a violinist perspective, or Mendelssohn, and look at something where the harmonic line and the strings are, soaring, and you can really feel that the bow arm for me as a conductor is very related to, if it's staccato or legato, it's almost very, sits in the bow arm quite similarly. Now this work doesn't have any strings in it, and it was extremely complex rhythmically. And I hadn't done a lot of Stravinsky before, and I hadn't even seen some of the time signatures. I hadn't played them before even. So I was like, well, I don't know how to conduct that. How do you get a subdivision when it's like 16 plus, something over 5? So it really was, it felt like it was probably one of my biggest jumps or leaps into the unknown. I really went in, now I would say I went in very green. And I felt like some of those situations, I've sort of doggy paddled to the end of the lap of the pool rather than being able to freestyle comfortably. But that's how you get there. You know, if I hadn't have gone for that, I wouldn't be here now.
You know, that's actually a beautiful situation, a very poignant situation for leadership. And let's translate that music language into a very global, universal issue for a lot of leaders. Often you're very good at what you do and what you specialize. And when you become a leader, you start to lead a team of experts of every single field. So how do you present yourself, lead, and make a positive impact in front of all the skilled people that potentially they know a lot more and in a lot more depth than you do?
You listen is the big one. I mean, in one of my particular roles as artistic advisor of Orchestra Victoria, I mean, I could think of many different things, but I have a lot of experience in different genres. I've worked as a ballet conductor. I've conducted internationally with opera. I also do contemporary. I've done smaller. I've done chamber. So I do work across different genres and styles. But I also have an artistic committee that I chair, made up of. Orchestra Victoria is one of only 2 specialist theatre pit orchestras in the country, in Australia, performing solely, our core work is performing for Opera Australia, the Australian Ballet, Victorian Opera, with about 12 weeks of self-presents and things. But they are, I mean, they've played so many seasons of Butterfly, Turandot, all the Verdis, all the Puccinis, all the ballets, all the Tchaikovsky. They've done it all for years with the greatest interpretations and conductors and singers and dancers. And so they really know their repertoire and they know what they want from conductors. And so in a lot of the sort of situations where I'm in with a group like that who have so much experience and so much understanding, I mean, I don't even live there, I just come in to chair these meetings. So they have so much experience. It's not my job to tell them what is best for them. That's, I think, a common mistake often done in leadership, is that it's like we need to go and say, I mean, it is my job to have an artistic vision, but that, in my opinion, needs to be very collaborative, and it needs to be led by me leading conversations that draws in their experience, listens to what they have to say, and then being able to summarise and apply that lens as a leader of what I feel is best for the organisation, which isn't always what they feel is best artistically for them. But it really relies on listening and taking the time to understand all the different perspectives. The one thing I've learnt in my years of leading in these sort of roles is that everything has context. And you really sort of need to understand and make decisions based on the whole wider, broader picture. That's a very important thing.
So not only that you go in as a leader, you listen with an open mind, but also it sounds like you also create the conditions for others to listen to one another as well.
I think you create space and you set boundaries. It's a little bit like parenting. I'm not saying that in a derogatory way, because these are some of the most incredible. I have complete admiration and trust and respect in the people that I work with, but in the way that they need to have their own input and their space to be able to put their ideas forward. But sometimes when you're in a position on these things, we might have different considerations. It could be that we understand the financial implications more. It could be that we understand the long-term strategy and the strategic vision of the company or organisation. It could be that there's other embargoed conversations going on about similar events, so you can't come on board about one. So there's always other things that might be underlying some of these decisions. So you have to open the space, listen and acknowledge, and also explain, well, I am listening, I take that on, but the best thing for the organisation today, in this place in time, that I need to make is such and such for this reason. And you hope that if you listen and you develop trust, which is a hugely important thing in relationships, then hopefully people will give you the respect to go, even if they say, I don't agree, but it's your call. So they will go with you on that.
Yes, trust is indeed vital in making constructive and collective decisions, but also the trust in yourself. I think we are returning to that topic again, that having that trust in what you do and your intention, your own intention, is integral.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that takes time, and it takes a bit of, failure and good support networks behind you, and a willingness to reflect on things as well. I think it takes a number of things. Yeah.
I feel now we've really gone into the thick of leadership, the responsibility and the pressure. And shall we listen to the third song, which is about inner tempo under pressure? And let's see which song that Jessica chose. There's so much grace and poise and flow in this. And please reveal the music so that we know it's actually about inner tempo under pressure.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one, but there's some method behind this. So this is from the Nutcracker, Tchaikovsky's Waltz of the Flowers. And so I spend a lot of time conducting for ballet, and it's such a brilliant analogy in terms of people often say, are you following the dancers, or are you setting the tempos, are you driving? And it's a mixture of everything in ballet. So in the reason why I picked this waltz is that in ballet, not so much contemporary, but if we're talking a classical story ballet, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, Giselle, there's a very sort of set structure where the principal roles who are dancing, the pas de deux, the solos, some of like little, variations, diverts and stuff like that will have, can be a bit changeable with tempo depending on the cast, depending on the choreography. If you've got a really tall cast, they're going to need more space to do a manège around the stage, or might need more space into lifts or turns. You might have a quick turner, you might have quite a slow turner. Some of them follow the music, some of them listen and hear and then dance because they react to it, and some of them drive the music and anticipate it. So it could be quite dancer specific. So that's very much, I set the intention of the tempo, I'm looking at the dancers, I'm constantly sort of seeing, is this right for them, and working out, is this doable, and then it's back to me, and it's a constant collaboration. In something like a waltz, which is often the whole corps de ballet, so you look at Sleeping Beauty waltz, Nutcracker waltz, Swan Lake, all of them have the big corps de ballet waltz. And they're generally always something that, because the only tempo in a pit I can get has to be related to other things around it. I don't have a metronome there with me. But a waltz is generally something, or the corps de ballet is something that they generally do all at the same tempo. I mean, even between ballets, usually a waltz is going to sit between 56 and 60 BPM, or 52 for a really slow one. I think Cinderella, Nutcracker, and that I can usually do most productions around 60 BPM. So, which is easy one to find because it's a second. So once it gets started. But the corps de ballet itself, we don't change the tempo. We phrase it, it's on us, and they will dance. What we've done in the rehearsal studio doesn't really evolve too much during the season. It's not dancer dependent. So that's something that I choose. The interesting about this one is that we just played the introduction to the waltz, which is done pretty much on whatever the harpist wants in that cadenza moment. So it's this organic moment of I set the tone for the chords. This is as the corps de ballet usually walking on or getting into position. I set this and we have a beautiful harp chords. And then you leave the harpist to it. So you create the space, you manage its boundary, and you give that time to the harpist. I will give a little bit of direction. Can we just slow that last run down a bit because she needs to have time to go to the middle of the stage or whatever it might be? But you hand it over to the harpist. As soon as that cadenza finishes, yum, bum, 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 it's my tempo and it comes back to me. And I think what is why I picked this one is just as an example of it is constantly changing ownership. But for me, something like a corps de ballet moment, which could be a gallop, a coda, or a waltz, a march, will often be the grounding sort of tempo that always stays the same. And then within these movements of the ballet, there will be cast dependent things that might have a bit more fluctuation in tempo. So that's kind of the understanding behind that work.
It sounds almost like the metaphorical dance, right? I often say a good relationship is like a dance, and you work out when to lead and when to follow. And I think the same goes with leadership, is knowing when to take charge and when to let people shine.
Absolutely. There's when to lead and when to yield is one of the biggest questions that we need to ask as conductors, because if we come in and we over-conduct everything and it's just our interpretation and vision, the musicians will never be able to fully reach their potential. If we don't give enough boundary and vision and structure, then it doesn't have any unity and it doesn't come together and tell the one story to the audience. So one of the hardest things about conducting is knowing when it needs to be, it is absolutely sitting here, I need this here, and when to then go and harp solo. You can now create and do your magic. And if it starts to go off a bit, you need to step in and go, keep moving because we're going to get behind. But it's being able to balance that, again, like managing a team, like parenting, like playing chamber music. If you've got the lead in a piano and then you become more of an accompanying role and the violin and the cello in a piano trio have the melody, knowing where that conversation or dialogue is in the forefront, and then when you play a supporting role, and understanding that dynamic is hugely important.
It constantly challenges you to consider where is the ego, right? And what is the most important element? What's your intention here?
Yeah, and I think, look, my rule is always to bring it back to the music. I think I once had a conductor tell me that you can't be a conductor without having a healthy ego, because it's such a hard thing. You're under so much scrutiny. You're constantly being criticised in real time. It's hard. But I think that's where having that, when I learnt that I can differentiate between who I am as a person and who I am as an artist, is important. Otherwise you'd be letting yourself down all the time, or you'd be buffing up your ego all the time. But I can do the biggest concert ever and fly back in from somewhere, exotic, where you're treated like a queen, and come home and I'm hanging out the washing, within half an hour of landing from the airport because the kids have school the next morning. It's very grounding. But it puts a different perspective on life. And I think that that's important, because it means when you are in it, you're not making ego decisions, you're making music decisions, and that's where we need to be.
And also not letting your work fully define you. Let's go to our last song. Very interesting music choices, Jess. I absolutely love the choices you are offering today. Tell us about the last song, and that is in answer to my question about life beyond the podium for Jessica.
Yeah, so this is the overture from an opera by Verdi, The Forces of Destiny, La Forza del Destino, and I've conducted this many, many times, and it's quite interesting, because the first time I did this was in a showcase concert in Dallas, in the USA for a showcase of conductors, and when I think about how I conducted it there and what I was thinking about, what technically I was looking at, what was challenging, and how I conducted it last month, and how I now approach the work, it's really interesting, I guess, to reflect on what has stayed the same and what has changed over that time. That ability to step back, step in, the overall vision, the confidence behind it. But it also leads me to a really interesting lesson that I think connects really well to leadership, is when I was there that week in Dallas, I had a mentorship with a wonderful French-Canadian conductor called Nicole Paiement. And Nicole Paiement is I think she's associate conductor with Dallas Opera. And we were working with her there. She does a lot of kind of early Baroque and late sort of 20th century, so really interesting works. And I was getting some feedback. We sat down to have a coffee just before I flew back to Australia, and I was getting feedback, and my questions were technical based. What do I need to do next? What's my next step? And her advice to me was something that sat with me. I mean, this would have been 15 years ago, and she said, I don't want to talk technique with you. The advice that I have is, you can't possibly, as however old I was then, 30-year-old woman from Perth, Western Australia, you can't possibly live all the experiences in life that you need to capture to be able to put it into your music. We've lived a very privileged life growing up in Australia. Been well educated, I have a family, support. She said, what you need to do is you need to experience all of the other emotions that put into something like the Verdi, which is fate, destiny, all of these themes. You need to go and talk to someone that's homeless, go and talk to an Afghani taxi driver about their life growing up. Or someone who's in a war-torn country, go and read poetry, go and look at architecture that surrounds you, what influenced them, go and understand what's behind paintings, go and talk to people from all walks of life, people who've lost children at birth, people who've had heartbreak, people who've had joy, all the experiences, because the more rounded a person you can be, the more you can understand humanity and life and emotion and all of these things, which I can't experience myself in my lifetime, the more you can channel that and put that into your work, and it will give you a much more rounded understanding to be able to perform from. So really just live life and question and talk to people, and understanding people would actually help me as an artist. And that sort of always stayed with me, and I've been very conscious of that over my life, and understanding the necessity of that as an artist, because what we are doing when we're creating art is we are really providing a relevant current picture of reflection of society. That's what we are doing in what we are expressing. And so to be able to understand that through that lens, through being as educated I can in people, is a pretty powerful thing that you don't learn about when you're studying music.
That's a very powerful piece of wisdom. It exudes humility, wisdom, and generosity. And also it speaks very much about the word you mentioned very early on in the program was empathy.
Yes. Yeah, and empathy is such an interesting one, isn't it? Because empathy is one thing. What you do with empathy is the other, and finding out, how to best, I guess, navigate situations if you realise that someone's making a decision for a certain reason or approaching you aggressively, but you also understand why, or their background is but you also can't be approached that way. So it's really, often I have to turn it around and say that this person isn't aiming something or targeting something at me. This is actually their stuff, but how I choose to do what I do with it is in my control. But I can't choose how they think or what they say, or So but it really understanding that there is a bigger picture, and that empathy for that someone might be going through something really difficult. Even from a rehearsal, even from a practical music rehearsal point of view, I've often used the analogy to my conducting students that in that rehearsal room, you're going to have a principal oboe and a principal flautist sitting next to each other, and they're both playing a line, and they're not together for some reason. And you can later find out that the principal flautist just got proposed to, and found out they're about to be married, and he's so excited. And then the principal oboe just found out that their cat had been run over. Right, so on the same day, they've had the exact, extreme emotional reactions and experience, and there is no doubt that they're going to be putting that into how they play, how they respond, how they react, the energy that they have in that room, their focus, all of that is going to affect that. Now, we don't know that as a conductor. All we know is that someone might not be perhaps as on board with an idea, or they might not be singing out with as much joy, or someone might need it to tone down because it's not actually about them in this flute solo. So you're dealing with a lot of other things, and you need to find a way that you don't make it about the person, but you make it about the music in your feedback for that. So I often talk to my students about the rehearsal language and the process and the way that you do that. You lead with empathy, but it's with strength as well, and where that meets is the important thing.
Yeah, empathy, strength, and courage to be who you truly are and uphold the values that are truly important to you. I hear in your style and choice of mentoring, you also talk about a lot of things beyond technical considerations. Sounds like you are nurturing the next generation with a lot of holistic considerations.
I think that there's more than technique that makes up a conductor, and I know that's a fact, because I have, many people say, oh, they've got great conducting technique, but I don't feel I want to play for them. Like, there's something else that makes people want to. And I also know conductors who don't have good technique at all, yet the musicians love working with them because they bring such a presence and a passion for the music and ability to communicate, even if it's not in their stick technique. So it's when the two things come together that you get a bit of gold.
You are truly a person of multiple talents, Jessica. We learned a lot from you today, and the way how you listen and how you choose to delegate and how to create space and how to lead effectively and with empathy, measure, and clarity. And before we finish, I usually have 3 really quick questions for every guest, and it should not take much time to consider. It's whatever that intuitively comes first. So Jessica, what is the single value that guides you the most?
Integrity.
When the pressure is high, how do you return to yourself?
I usually am very, very good at just deep breathing, go for a walk on the beach, time with my family, and just try and get back to just me, not me and the pressure. Yeah. It's actually a skill you have to have when you do what I do.
It's change of tempo and change of dynamics. And what does a life well lived look like to Jessica?
Oh, great question. I think valued relationships, with people. My job particularly as a conductor, but even as a musician by yourself, is a very lonely one. So having relationships, be it with family, partners, children's, colleagues, audience members, wider, yourself, nature, I think is very important. So the more connected you are with people, the more that you're going to get out of why we're here.
I often compare life to a symphony, right? It's got a bit of every chord. It's important to have every taste of a chord. So yeah, thank you so much for your very generous sharing and your insight, and all the beautiful and interesting music too.
Thank you, Zen. It was such a pleasure to talk to you.
That's the end of season 1. When I started, I didn't know how many people wanted to sit with slow conversations about music and the inner life of leadership. It turns out many of you did, and you stayed to the end. Thank you. Before we go, 2 things. These leaders each named 4 pieces that shaped them. I'd love to know one of yours. Please leave it in the comments. I read them all. And a small surprise. I'd planned to close here, but your response to this season moved me. And then a story came my way that I couldn't keep to myself. So there's one more coming, an encore. A leader from the top of global banking, and a story I think you'll carry with you. Stay subscribed and it'll find you. I'm Zen. This has been Crescendo Conversations. I'll see you at the encore.